Hello, Tarmo Ramel here, and I'm about to give you a short tutorial on random sampling using tools in Excel to make things a little bit easier for you. We're going to look at three different approaches, and we're going to be using data set that is freely available and downloaded from the URL in the yellow box above from Sling Academy. The URL is there. You can simply go in, download an Excel file that has mock data for students and grades received in various classes. What I've done is sort of pared that data set into something a lot smaller for today's illustration. So rather than having 2,000 records, we have 50. And rather than having a whole series of subjects and all kinds of information about students, we have a very limited 4 columns of data. So I'm going to delete this yellow box just because we don't need it here, but that at least you know where you can get the data from. So if we look at our data set here, maybe a little bit small, I'm going to slightly enlarge this information for you. And we can see that we've got an ID number. It's simply a serial number that identifies unique rows. We have a student's first name, their last name, and their grade that they received in a geography class. This is going to be our demonstration data set, and if I scroll down, we can see that we have 50 entries within this data set. If I quickly remove myself from the image, we can also see that we have 2 tabs in today's workbook: data, the one that we're currently looking at, and one called random numbers that we're going to get to in just a little bit. So I've taken the liberty of formatting the data set into something that is maybe a little bit more visually pleasing than the form that it downloads in, but the most important thing is that this is our population, and we want to subset from here a sample, a random sample of, let's say, 10 students. So I'm going to head over here and I'm going to create a new column called sample num, and I'm going to start by putting in the first 2 sample numbers, 1 to 2, and I'm going to simply drag down from this bottom corner when our mouse becomes a little crosshairs for 10 rows. This way I know that I have 10 samples. Once I've filled in data next to them for each sort of sampled student, I know that my sampling is complete. So the first way that we can sample our data is to use the data analysis tool for sampling. We're going to look at that first. Then we're going to look at using a random number generator. And when we're done doing that, we're going to use a random number table. So 3 different ways by which we can get a random sample, all of them absolutely valid approaches for doing so. So I'm going to remove this box just so that it's not in the way. And let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to head over to the data ribbon and look across here to the data analysis option. We're going to click on there and it's going to open a pop-up window. And if you scroll down, you see lots of different options. We're going to want to make sure that we select sampling and then click OK. That brings up another window, and it's going to ask for an input range. So if we click on this little button on the side, it's going to allow us to highlight the column of unique row numbers, or our ID field. Click back on here when we're done, and notice that it's put that into the window here. So this is the input range that we're going to sample from. We don't want to perform periodic sampling, we want a random sampling, so we're going to make sure that we select random sampling, and we want 10 random samples. If we want 8, we would type in 8. If we want 15, we put in 15, but we're going to do 10 random samples. And then we're going to write our output here at I3, so it's going to line up nice and neat with our sample numbers. So once we're happy with those, we're going to click on OK. And all of a sudden we have our random sample provided here. But oh, we've got 42 is repeated. We can't have the same sample twice. So let's simply redo this analysis so that we don't end up with that problem. So we're just going to run it again. It's going to tell me that it's going to overwrite, and I'm going to make sure that none of these values are repeated. Oh, but they are. So again, we can run this sampling over again. And 32, 47, 24, 4, 13, 27, 16, 45, 8, 30. Okay, we have 10 unique row IDs that are going to form the sample that we want to make. So let's call this the sample ID, and we'll put a nice little border under here so that things are nice and clean. So now these numbers simply tell me the first sample from my population is going to be the row that has an ID of 32. So I'm going to head over here down to 32 and see, this is Cynthia. So we can head over there. We can Control C on a PC or Command C in Windows, or right click and copy if you're using a mouse. I'm just going to do Command C because I'm using a Mac. And I'm going to head up over here and I'm going to Command V to paste. If you're using Windows, it's Control C for copy, Control V for paste, or you could right click on that cell and choose to paste there as well. So now we have our first student. Then we're going to go to the second one, 47. We're going to head down here and find 47, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to copy that student's information and we're going to paste it over here just to be nice and clean. Let's also take these headings and put them over top so we know what's in those columns. This becomes a little bit tedious. It's not so bad because we only have 10 samples, but imagine you wanted to take a sample of 67 or 212 students or some really large number. Scrolling through, finding those values, and then pasting them into a new table that form your samples becomes a little bit tedious. So there's a better way by which we can do this. I'm just going to delete those for a moment, and I'm going to introduce you to a tool called XLOOKUP. It's a function in Excel. We start off by typing in =, telling us that it's a function, and then we type in the name of the function, XLOOKUP, and we open our bracket. It means that we now have to identify this series of parameters that are going to govern how this tool works. The first thing is, what's the lookup value? Well, we're going to look up the value 32. We have to put a comma because we separate all of the arguments for this function call with commas. It tells us then to look up, where's the lookup array? Where are we looking up these values? We're looking up those values here in this array of values. And then again, comma. And then it says, well, what's the return array? Well, the return array is going to be all of the columns of data that we might be interested in. We then say, well, what do we type if that record isn't found? Well, let's put in something like NA for not available. It shouldn't happen because we're selecting things that we've already sampled from, so it should be okay, but it's just to be sure. So now if we hit in enter, notice that we end up with the data being written across. So we have some extra things that we don't need because we took additional values from our data set, but we have Cynthia Knapp 72. The problem is, if I take this and I pull down, notice that it also shifts the input range from which it's taking its measurements. So we want to modify this function just a little bit so that it's going to allow us to fill it all the way down and keep things nice and clean for us. So to do that, we're going to select the first entry And we know that I3 is something that is going to increment row by row because that's the value that we're going to be looking up. But this lookup array, these values over here, these never change. We're always looking from the same sort of sequence of numbers. So we're going to put in dollar signs in front of the letters, in front of the B's, and then we're also going to put in dollar signs in front of the numbers. So the 3 and the 52, which means that we're fixing those so that they don't increment. The dollar sign fixes the B3 and the B52 so that they're always going to be the same. And we're going to do the same when we identify where the data is going to be pulled from. So we're going to put a dollar sign in front of the B3 and the F52, and we hit enter, and notice that nothing changes. But when I pull these down, now it's going to actually find the right student because the range of values that we're selecting from and looking up in is going to be fixed. And when we look at this, we say, well, this is really great. These are the things that we really want. We want the student's first name, their last name, and their grade in geography. We can copy those values, and we can head over here to paste special, and we can paste just the values. Then I can come in here, I can delete all of that, highlight the data that we want to simply slide up into position. And now we have our sample based on the sampling tool and data analysis to perform this result. That's the first way that we can perform a random sampling of our data. The second is to use a random number generator. So I'm going to replicate this table down here so that we can see what we're doing. And rather than using the data analysis tool, I'm going to use a function called rand between. And then in the brackets, it wants the low and the upper values that we're going to randomize. So my lowest value is going to be 1, and my highest value is going to be 50 because I have, remember, 50 different unique identifiers. So we're going to take this function and I'm going to simply drag it down, and I'm going to drag it beyond the 10 that I need in case there's a duplicate, which in this case there doesn't seem to be, but if there was, I could simply skip it and take the next value, and I don't have to go back and randomly generate additional values. So now that I have these sample IDs, these are the ones that I'm going to want to sample for, I'm going to copy these values. So I'm going to use Command C or Control C or right click and copy. I'm going to go off to the side here and right click, paste special, values. I'm then going to delete all of these because I don't need them anymore because I already know that these are the unique IDs that I want. And then to fill in these, again, I would use the same XLOOKUP tool that I used above. And then it will pull the necessary data from my population into this table, and I would have a sampled subset. So that's a second approach, using rand between. The third approach uses random numbers. So I'm going to click on this random numbers tab at the bottom of our workbook. And when I do that, it's going to take me to a table of random numbers. These are readily available on the internet. The one that's shown here is from the URL shown in the yellow box. You're more than welcome to copy it, use it, but you also have one at the back of your textbook. And quite honestly, these random number tables are all over the place. I'm just going to delete this table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first 2 digits of each number, and I'm going to use those to identify the row or the ID for the record that I want to sample. So these first two digits, 1, 1 or 11, if I head back, I can see that in the third approach, my first sample is going to be 11. The next sample will be 3, 6. I'm going to go over here, type in 3, 6. Back to the next, 75. Well, 75 is bigger than what I have in my data set, so I'm going to skip this one. The next one is going to be 37, then 26. So 37, then 26, and so on. I would then just fill out the sample IDs by pulling values from the random number table, and then I would fill these using XLOOKUP the same way that I did above. So 3 different ways of getting a random sample. Choose the one that you like, the one that you're comfortable with. They all give you an unbiased random sampling of your population to provide a subset sample that you can then continue doing your work with. Until next time, have some fun.